DanDaDan. The bombastic, over-the-top, high-intensity, emotional, romantic, action-packed, touching story of a gyaru, a nerd, a narcissist, and a himbo who, with the occasional help from the gyaru's grandma, a sentient lucky cat ornament, and sometimes a human anatomical model, all combat paranormal and extraterrestrial threats in between classes in the hopes of finding and reclaiming the nerd's misplaced golden nuggets. Yes, you heard that right, courtesy of the lucky cat ornament. Did I lose you yet? Good. Because whatever you've heard about this show's insanity will not, cannot prepare you for the levels of absurdity and sheer chaos contained within this, at the time of writing, 24-episode package. That said, Studio Science Saru's unholy masterpiece of an anime isn't all spectacle and flair. It's also deeply thoughtful, too. The series title itself comes from 3 Japanese phrases: Kaidan, meaning ghost story, Kedan or Kidan, meaning strange story, and Taikendan, meaning personal experience. All of which accurately encapsulates this larger-than-life story. At the same time, however, in between its many segments of fast-paced, balls-to-the-wall action, you'd be surprised at just how much time is dedicated to its lower, slower moments. They're not afraid to take their foot off the gas for a minute or two, and it all comes together to tell a truly profound and meticulously well-crafted story about the most challenging, emotionally turbulent, and transformative periods of youth. That's right, this story's about puberty. Honestly, you don't even have to look too deeply into it to notice either. Everything is intense to the point of overstimulation to mirror the intense way that teenagers often experience the world. Ira, Okarun, and Gigi all experience physical changes as they awaken to their powers, and they even do a good job at capturing the clumsiness and confusion of the dreaded awkward stage in all of its cringe-worthy glory. Beyond that, they also hardly have any understanding adults they can turn to with their problems, and on a slightly darker note, a good chunk of those adults they are around are constantly trying to exploit or take advantage of them at every turn, a trend not too uncommon among adolescents in the real world as well.
He was into the barely legal type. Like, he liked 15-year-old girls. 15-year-old girls.
The barely legal type.
Hey, yo!
This was a game.
911.
Officer, right there. FBI, come on in, fellas.
The circumstances that these characters find themselves in may be fantastical or even a bit absurd, but when you get down to the essence of what their problems and challenges are, they end up feeling all too real, often uncomfortably so. Both Momo and Okarun are SA'd, Gigi has his kindness and innocence taken advantage of and gets bodyjacked, Ira is straight up killed by her stalker, and Kinta, well, nothing happens to Kinta. But he does show the struggle of trying to cling to your youth in a world that can often be hostile to youthfulness, and if you were a weeb before the Great Shift, then you know that that's its own kind of traumatizing. The manga was written by Yukinobu Tatsu, a former assistant to Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man's Tatsuki Fujimoto, and you can really see how much of an influence that experience must have had on him when you read his story. Much like Fujimoto, most of his characters get stronger by overcoming mental or emotional distress. And although DanDaDan's treatment of its cast isn't quite as emotionally devastating, it certainly doesn't pull its punches either. Each day, these kids have their innocence threatened in new and horrifying ways, but those very challenges act as the catalyst to their growth and give them the tools with which they can navigate this new and insane world. And from among our cast, there are few characters that embody this idea better than... First up on our list of tortured teens is the awkward man of the hour and veritable ladies' man himself, Okarun. He's easily the most obvious representation of the whole puberty thing, with his entire character arc mainly dealing with how he measures up to the traditional standard and image of masculinity. If the fact that his turbo granny transformation ages him up into a moody teenager wasn't on the nose enough for you, he's unambiguously emasculated right at episode 1, and we spend the rest of our time in this series trying to restore his stolen manhood. Is this just an excuse to make more dick jokes? Perhaps, but there's a bit more to it as well. For starters, judging from first impressions, it's clear that Okarun isn't exactly the paragon of manliness. He's very meek and mild-mannered, often being unable to maintain eye contact, and he isn't very fit or athletic either. And rather than socializing with friends and classmates, he instead prefers to spend his time alone with his head dug into a book about his obscure, eccentric hobby. Going off first appearances alone, he stands in stark contrast to his namesake and Momo's celebrity crush, the brooding and stoic Japanese actor Ken Takakura. If you don't know who he is, then in gaijin terms, he's kinda like a Japanese Al Pacino or Robert De Niro, whom I'm praying are still relevant references for this crowd, but if not, to put it simply, And that's something important to take note of, because the characters that these actors often play tend to feed into more traditional, old-fashioned ideals regarding manliness like assertiveness, toughness, and confidence. Okurun by comparison. Interestingly enough though, it's precisely the ways in which he diverges from the typical picture of masculinity that speaks most for his manhood. Pun intended. These qualities are what really set him apart from the rest and help to make him more endearing as a character both to us the audience and to seemingly every woman within a 5 quintillion kilometer radius. Yeah, he can come off as a bit of a pushover, but when it comes to the things that really matter to him, not only is he quick to stand on business, he's repeatedly proved that he's willing to do so against enemies much bigger and stronger than himself. He's a man of principle and isn't afraid to rise to the occasion whenever the situation calls for it, and he doesn't need a reason to stand up for others. In that sense, he does kind of resemble the old actor guy after all. Not bad for a guy with no balls, huh? And that's exactly it. Okurun's testicular treasure hunt is about more than just finding his pair of Dragon Balls. It's his transition into manhood itself. His character and values are tested in all kinds of ridiculous ways, and he's repeatedly forced to take on tons of new responsibilities and make all kinds of high-stakes decisions on the spot. And while these sink-or-swim moments he's constantly faced with serve their immediate purpose of pushing Okurun to grow in the ways that he needs to, right at the moment he needs to, they also have a lasting impact on him as well. For example, while it's true that he's pretty weak and unfit, he's willing to acknowledge that and actually does something about it by working out after school and during his breaks. We see him do the same thing again after the Evil Eye arc when he realizes he needs to level up if he's going to be able to keep up with the rest of the team. When you take a good look at our boy by the end of season 2, Okurun hardly resembles his former self from the start of the series. And although he still has some areas for improvement, he's more of a grower than a shower if you will, he's significantly more confident, decisive, and overall much better adapted and comfortable with his new strange and surreal reality. And beyond that, he's even managed to become someone that the rest of the team can comfortably rely upon. Not surprising that they do, of course. I mean, you have no choice but to acknowledge a man that can rage bait a centuries-old vengeful spirit into submission. Despite Okurun's sack of treasure being empty, it doesn't take an inch away from who he is as a person. On the other end of the spectrum though, maturity and adulthood aren't always what they're cracked up to be. Being able to keep your inner child alive after you've grown up can be an equally impressive accomplishment. And in those regards, there's no one more impressive than... Everything about Gigi makes him the perfect foil character for Okurun. He's charismatic, confident, attractive, and highly athletic. He checks off a good chunk of those manly man boxes I was talking about earlier, but in Gigi's case, his story doesn't focus on the process of maturing into adulthood. It does the opposite and looks at the challenges that come with preserving your sense of youthfulness. I'll be honest, I was tempted to think we were headed towards more of a dumb jock trope when he was first introduced, but I was pleasantly surprised at just how much was going on in that oh-so-spacious head of his. You know, other than random anime openings from the 90s. With his considerate and empathetic attitude and caring nature, he gives off a lot more than just childish immaturity. He takes it a step further and has a heart that's straight up just about as pure as a child's. Once he realized that Evil Eye was just a lonely kid wanting friends to play with, his first instinct was to disregard his own interest and be that friend for him. Ironically, however, this made him the perfect target for Evil Eye, who preys on Gigi's kind-hearted and wide-eyed disposition to pull a good old-fashioned Captain Ginyu. This whole arc is clearly about innocence lost and presents Gigi with real-life consequences for trying to maintain a youthful spirit in the often all-too-cynical and conniving world of adults. Time and time again, we see how his personality can become a burden not only to himself, but to the people around him as well. His initial playdate with Evil Eye nearly gets everyone killed, but it doesn't end there. They spend days afterwards trying to exorcise him and book an entire band to finish the job, only to abandon the entire thing at the very last moment because it made him feel sad. Then, even when they do finally get Evil Eye under control, a term I use very loosely mind you, Momo and the rest of the gang are forced to walk on eggshells the entire time and have to keep a close eye on him. And even with their best efforts, the Ayase household still winds up with a brand new floor plan. Impressively, Gigi still manages to hold strong to his convictions throughout all this and refuses to abandon that lonely child even as it continues to throw his and everyone else's lives into utter chaos and threatens their safety. At this point, it would be easy to conclude that he just needs to take some responsibility and grow up already. But what ends up saving the day isn't more maturity, it's more childishness. Evil Eye and Okarun basically just play fight in the front yard for a few minutes, and then suddenly, before you can say not it, they're deciding which days they're allowed to come outside and play again. They're all able to help support Gigi and tame Evil Eye by taking a page from Gigi's book and channeling their own sense of childishness to come to a compromise. And while he's still a flaming ball of rage and fury, he is now a domesticated ball of rage and fury. Just look at him. Why, that's a proper member of society if I ever saw one. A lot's been said about the importance of remaining a child at heart, but far less often do we hear about the kinds of sacrifices and compromises you have to make in order to do so, or about how much of a challenge it can be to be around someone like that. In that sense, Gigi serves as both a reminder and a cautionary tale all wrapped up in one, and in doing so, he's able to breathe fresh life into both ideas. A similar sentiment is echoed by Kinta with his mech obsession. It saves the day during the kaiju battle, but it's also the reason for his lack of popularity at school. Mostly. On paper, everything we know about Gigi could easily make him come off as intensely obnoxious and even selfish, but his kindness and consideration towards others does a lot to balance him out and adds layers to his character to help us both understand him and his choices and outlook on life. If we're talking about being true to ourselves though, the last two members of our paranormal party have a lot to contribute to the conversation. First, let's start with... At last, it's finally time to talk about the leading lady. As much as she shares the stage with the rest of the Idiot Brigade, Momo is easily the face of the series as a whole, despite the actual goal of the plot being centered around Okarun. And it's really not hard to see why. She's got all the endearing qualities of your typical bold, confident MC, without seemingly any of their more annoying tropes. She's loud and assertive, but not arrogant. Down to earth, but not a pushover, you get the idea. More than anything though, she feels like a real unique person and not something shat out of the MC recycling plant. With Momo, what you see is more or less what you get, and aside from maybe Gigi, she's got the strongest sense of self-awareness compared to the rest of the gang and has the clearest understanding of who she is as a person. Spend more than 2 minutes with her and it's clear that she's a whole lot more than just a pretty face. A fact that stands in stark contrast to how she's often treated throughout the show. Confession time, I was this close to dropping the series entirely right at episode 1 during that scene. Call me soft, but I even had to pause and scrub through the episode to make sure that nothing even more weird was about to happen. I was pretty put off and felt uncomfortable about the whole thing, but as I continued to think about it in the days afterwards, I started to wonder. Maybe that discomfort was the entire point. Maybe that tinge of helplessness and hopelessness I felt while watching was meant to give us, the audience, some perspective. Considering how evocative and emotional a lot of the other heavier scenes in this show are, I wouldn't think that it's too much of a stretch either. And although a small handful of people don't speak for an entire population, the ladies I did get additional insight from about this seem to have arrived at a similar conclusion. As controversial as these moments are, and I do personally kind of wish that they weren't there, they do also highlight a harsh reality. I mean, it's certainly no accident that the aliens' disguises look like middle-aged salarymen. With her quick thinking and sharp wit in those moments, you almost get the sense that Momo isn't a stranger to handling situations like these. She's a vibrant, complex character with a truly bright personality, but much like a lot of girls her age, she constantly has to fight to be seen as a complete person and not be objectified. To the Serpoians, she's nothing more than a less than willing organ donor, and episode 1 opens up with her getting harassed and abused by her boyfriend, who then dumps her for not wanting to sleep with him or become his personal ATM. Despite her generally upbeat disposition, you can really feel Momo's frustration at trying to live a normal life and find romance, while simultaneously having to constantly tussle with how she's perceived by others. Having said all that though, initially she has her own troubles with being able to see anything much past skin deep, and even comes off as somewhat superficial, like with her whole Ken Takakura obsession. And then in comes Ken Chad Kakura himself. But don't get it twisted, ladies and gentlemen, he's not simply here to swoop in and solve all of her problems for her, he's here to help her see them differently. Like we discussed earlier, he's the epitome of more than meets the eye, and through their friendship, Momo is able to develop her emotional maturity and begins to expand her horizons and adopt new perspectives. And although she's lived her life so far understanding that it's her against the world, their shared experiences and the ways in which he supports her through them help to teach her not only how to rely on others, but also what true support actually looks like. Okurun is Momo's partner in the truest sense of the word, and that partnership gives her the space she needs to fully grow into herself and out of old ideas. This new attitude of hers is quickly put to the test though during their miscommunication over Aira after the Acro Silky incident. When she sees her and Okurun together at school, Momo understandably slips back into her habit of jumping to conclusions. But once he realizes what's really going on, Okurun responds by pressing the issue without turning it into me right, you wrong, even though technically he is.
I don't care if others get the wrong idea about what happened, but if it's you, I couldn't stand it.
He doesn't give up on her or bulldoze his way through the conversation. Instead, he directly addresses their communication issues and offers to work with her to get past the confusion. And in turn, she meets him halfway and initiates the conversation between them about what really happened once things calm down.
You know what that is? It's gross.
Judging from her reaction to that cliffhanger at the end of Season 2, however, she might need slightly more than a talk no jutsu to get her through this one. Good luck, Okurun, my boy. You gon' need it. And Momo's not even the only one he's got to worry about either. He's also gonna have to deal with
ITGIRL. You know I am that girl. Shh, bitch, don't kiss and tell. It girl from ATL.
Last up to the plate, we have DanDaDan's very own Queen of Delulu. I know I'm probably uttering high blasphemy by saying this, but Aira's actually my favorite character of the bunch. Okay, she's kinda very cringe at first, but she's really grown on me. A lot of people miss it, but she has a pretty interesting arc, and she's every bit as complex a character as Momo. Their stories are somewhat similar too, in that they both have to grapple with their perceived image, but it's in the ways that they respond to their circumstances that they begin to diverge. While Momo fights to be seen for her true self, Aira struggles with the pressure that comes from hiding hers. When we first meet her, she's fully convinced herself that she's saving the world one fake smile at a time by acting in a way that meets everyone's unrealistic expectations for her. She's basically a chunibyo that never matured past middle school, and when she finds one of Okurun's golden gonads, her delusions shift into overdrive and she starts taking that whole save the world thing literally. Unfortunately, even with powers, there's still one thing standing in her way, preventing her from truly becoming the hero of justice she believes she is. Herself. Unsurprisingly, the real Aira behind the mask is a far cry from the one up on the pedestal they've got her on, somewhere up in the stratosphere. And although she's done a good job of making it seem as though she's Little Miss Perfect, in reality she works herself hard to keep up her reputation and is always careful of who might be watching lest the mask slip, something that seems to happen often whenever Momo's in the picture. It makes sense though when you take a second to realize that her true self underneath all the pretentious BS is much more similar to Momo than either of them would like to admit. The chemistry between the two of them is really well done and does a good job of highlighting how well they, like Okurun and Gigi, mirror each other. Whereas Aira represents everything Momo doesn't want to be, quiet, mild-mannered, and preoccupied with the opinions of others, Momo represents everything Aira wishes she could be, loud, boisterous, and most importantly, honest with herself. This same struggle is reflected in the source of her powers, Acro Silky, who in life fought to keep her double life a secret from her daughter, a fight she ultimately lost. She tried performing a similar balancing act with her two selves, but eventually one of those lives caught up to the other and she ultimately lost both. We see Aira begin to take a different path, however, when she has access to her powers and her chunibyo fantasies become reality, bringing that loud, boisterous side of hers to center stage. And the more she uses those powers, the more that side of hers sticks around even in human form. By the time she helps Okurun with his training, her charade all but evaporates entirely. What's most interesting though is that the more she grows to accept who she is, the more she begins to actually embody that superhero image she has of herself. While Momo might be their strategic leader, anytime the group is in actual combat, it's Aira that the team's offense actually revolves around. And you could even argue that she's got better chemistry with Okurun in a fight than he does with Momo. When she's not busy hallucinating, she's actually a pretty competent leader and an adaptable fighter. And since her growth is more about accepting herself than adopting completely brand new ideas, hers is the fastest of the four as well. It doesn't take much prodding at all for her to abandon that oh-so-precious reputation of hers and come clean about the rumors she spread about Momo, and she handles the fallout pretty well, taking full accountability for her mistakes. She even manages to do the seemingly impossible and has a conversation with Momo without the two trying to rip each other's heads off. She's got a surprisingly strong sense of responsibility that gets a lot more of a chance to shine through the more she continues to live authentically. Although it's true that the main reason she helps with Okurun's training is because she wants his golden balls as much as he does, we also see that she has guilt over triggering Gigi's last transformation and getting Momo hurt, and that likely played just as much of a role in her deciding to volunteer. The nice girl act doesn't last long as the fight wears on, but it isn't until Okurun thanks her afterwards that she fully malfunctions as she realizes that her meticulously well-rehearsed responses aren't coming out as naturally as they used to. She's got one hell of an uphill battle ahead of her though, as this love triangle turns into a love square. Or is it a pentagon now? Anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing if she ever manages to cope with reality, or if she'll just continue living in her own personal infinite Tsukiyomi. This fever dream of a show is truly a coming-of-age story, the likes of which no one has ever seen. And I for one am here for every ounce of the chaotic insanity it has to offer. I look forward to seeing what the puberty gang are going to get themselves into next year, but for now, feel free to hit that like button if you like the video and drop a comment. And keep a lookout because next time, I'm finally going to get something off my chest.